Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the GDV live sessions. My name is Mehreen Khan. I am one of the Brussels correspondents for the Financial Times here in Brussels. I cover lots of things for us at the newspaper, including environment policy, and it is my pleasure to have two very esteemed guests with me today to talk about the path towards a sustainable economy, which I'm hoping will be a very live subject for us in the next 45 minutes or so. I apologise for the fact that we are a couple of minutes late, but we will still use up our allotted time. And environment policy, green policy, the climate transition are all huge topics which are going to be keeping people like me, other journalists, and the European Commission and its European politicians very busy. So without further ado, I want to introduce the two panelists we have. First of all, we have Pascal Canfin, who is a member of the European Parliament, a member of the French En Marche Party, and crucially, the chair of the European Parliament's Environment Committee. Pascal will have a front seat guiding the European Union and the European Parliament on some of the most important legislative files that will probably set a path dependency when it comes to the EU trying to hit very, very ambitious climate goals. And secondly, we also have Jörg Asmussen, who's the CEO of the German Insurance Association. Jörg is a former deputy finance minister of Germany. He's an economist and a former member of the European Central Bank's executive board. And hopefully, I think between the three of us, we'll be able to triangulate a little bit between the politics, the private sector, and I guess some of the public opinion which surrounds one of the most novel and innovative fronts in European Union policy, which is climate change. Pascal, maybe we can start with you to give us a sense of where we stand right now in May 2021. We're about 6 weeks away from a very crucial legislative moment, which will arrive in July, when the European Commission is going to be presenting something called Fit for 55, which is a terribly named I guess, umbrella project for something that's actually very important, which is, like I said, creating the legislation which will create a path dependency which should get us firstly to 2030 climate goals and then eventually to 2050 and net zero. In May, we're sitting here, but also a couple of weeks before a European Council, where European Union leaders are going to have a discussion about some of the most sensitive parts of the climate agenda before the Commission comes out with its legislative proposals. So sitting here right now, how sanguine or potentially worried are you that the politics of this transition are sort of going to be really exposed in terms of public opinion, in terms of the views of the European Council, and how will that feed into what Brussels is going to try and give us in July?
Well, thank you, Mehreen. Thank you, Mehreen. Good afternoon to all, and thank you for your invitation. You said that we are a few 2 months, you said, before the 15th of July presentation of this package, which is true. We are also a couple of weeks after the adoption of the European Climate Law, after the presentation by the US of their own NDC, so their own trajectory up to 2030. And we are a few days after a massive change in Germany regarding the German climate policies and the new target. So I must say that it's incredible how fast things are moving forward. I will give you one example. Cars, which is something dear to the German heart as well. A couple of years ago, having as a principle a phasing out date for non-EV cars was just theoretical. Then a couple of countries started to have one date here and there. Now, the principle of having a phasing out date at the European level in the July package is set. The question is which date? And we are converging civil society, European Parliament, Commission, and more member states, plus car makers, including Audi, including Volkswagen, and so on, that 2035 will be the end date of non-EV vehicles, and maybe hydrogen fuel, depending on the technology. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have bet €1 on this. So I can tell you it goes very, very fast. So that's exactly the theory of change of the turning point. And that's the beauty of capitalism and market economy, that once you start having the real dynamics, the technologies, the star aligning, and so on, then you can go much quicker than linearity. So my gut feeling, but it's not only a gut feeling, it's a political analysis based on also concrete signals from the industry, from the financial markets and so on, that we were way too slow the last 2 decades. We will go much quicker than the linear trajectory up to climate neutrality for the next 3 decades. Because actually life is not linear. Life is dynamic. We were too slow because we are slow when we start, and then we speed up. And we are exactly at this turning point. And my conclusion for this first comment will be that for you to know, we are going to change 54 European laws, 54, between now and the end of 2022. So either it's already done, climate law or taxonomy, or it's proposed, the reform of NFRD, or close to be proposed, the 13 laws that will be changed in July, and so on, up to the end of 2022, more than 50 laws. And when you change at the same time 50 laws, it means that you enter a systemic change. And that's exactly where we are now in Brussels.
Great, thank you for that. Maybe just before I get to Jörg, Pascal, the European Parliament had a position on so you mentioned the climate law, and I think what you've set out is that everyone seems to be on board with the direction of travel, but the pace of travel is still something that different constituencies in Europe want to go faster and some want to go slightly slower. The Parliament itself wanted a slightly more ambitious 60% target for 2030. We haven't ended up there after the negotiations. How will the Parliament position itself, as you said, with these potentially 30 new laws and 54 in total that need to be amended? Is it still with the view of making sure that at least we get to 55, or are you still sounding more optimistic that actually when it comes to the nuts and bolts, we could overshoot that target as long as the legislation is ambitious enough?
As always, when you are in a race, it's nice to say, well, I'm going to, you have to make the kilometers and the second and the third and the fourth and so on and so on. So that's where we are. And everything we need to win the minus 55, which is actually, as you know, minus 57 battle, everything we need to win this one is useful to win the minus 70, 80, 90, which is the next decade. So there is no regret scenario. I mean, phasing out of coal, phasing out the ICE for cars, and so on and so on and so on. That's exactly what we need to do anyway. So let's do it. And my gut feeling is that once you have, if I take the coal case, which is also important in Germany, my gut feeling is that when you start having a reform of the carbon market, which will put a price of 50 to 60 euros, we are already at 50. The European Commission target price, when you look at the impact assessment of the package you were referring to, the target price is a range between 45 and 60. We haven't changed the law. We are already at 50. So it's obvious that we are going to have to be at 50, 60 for a long period of time. At that level of price, coal cannot compete anymore. So whatever the political decision is, anyway, the phasing out of coal will go quicker because we are serious with the carbon market reform, which is true for Germany, it is true for Poland. But then the main risk is that it's a disordered transition. So that's why we need to put in place the right regulations to handle the social dimensions, the Just Transition Fund, and to make sure that when you can phase out of coal because you have alternatives. And the problem is that the carbon market itself does not invest in the alternative. The carbon market makes relative prices different, but then it's also a revenue tool to invest. So the key issue now for me is the investment plan. And that's where we need still, at least at the European level, I don't know for Germany, but at least at the European level, we need a clear business plan or financing plan of the transition. Who is going to finance what, which scale, who is taking the risk, who is de-risking, and so on and so on and so on. And I would say that is still the missing piece. Once we would have that, I think we will have the whole thing to deliver at scale, at speed, what we need to be a leader on climate action.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Pascal. I think that's a perfect way to bring Jörg into this conversation, because when there is a lot of optimism that the private sector can unleash lots of this investment. Jörg, maybe you can tell for the people watching and listening, what is the role of insurers in the green transition? Doesn't seem to be self-evident if you ask that question. So maybe you could elaborate on what you think the role the sector has to play in terms of greening itself, but also, I guess, doing the risk management that insurers have done when it comes to, things like stranded assets in old technologies, which we are now increasingly talking about.
Yes, Marine, thank you with pleasure, and thanks, Pascal, for participating and for giving us the very clear direction at the beginning where Europe should move. I mean, when I started my job here more than a year ago, I said it will be very clear that insurers will become more green and will become more digital. So these are the two strategic directions that we focus on. And indeed, the train has left the station for the insurance sector in Germany, but for Germany as a whole. I mean, Pascal just alluded to the ruling that the German Constitutional Court made a few days ago, which de facto gave future generations a voice in the current political debate. This is really totally different thinking in our country, and I very much welcome that. And in this sense, German insurers are also committed to the Green Deal of the EU. We are committed to the Paris climate goals, and we ourselves have adopted sustainability position in January this year, committing our insurance sector exactly to the climate goals that were decided in Paris. And it's true what you said, Marine. The core business for us is covering risks of society, of people, of entrepreneurs, of big companies, of infrastructure, small companies, everyday people's property. And short-termism is not our business. Yeah? We have long, stable business relations with society, even decades when it comes to pensions, but also for property protection. And this we have all kept in mind when we have decided about our own sustainability position, and that covers the whole value chain of insurance companies. That's first our investment portfolio. We have currently in Germany alone 1,700 billion assets under management, which we really can deploy to finance the double transformation of our economy. And we have declared ourselves the goal of making our investment portfolio climate neutral by 2050. But what is more important in this respect, that we have set intermediate goals. In this case, the first goal is in 2025. Because I think it's relatively cheap talk if one always sets goals for the times when at least people at my age will be no longer in a kind of active position. For Pascal, that can be very different, but for me, it's certainly the case 2050 or even 2045. So let's make this more operational and credible by setting intermediate target by 2025 on how we invest our portfolio. The second topic is how we run our own operations. Yeah? And we have committed to be climate neutral in our own business operations also by 2025. In all companies, but also in the association here itself. Third issue is underwriting. Yeah? We identify with the long-term goal of no longer accepting business or industrial risk that negate the transformation process to a sustainable and climate neutral economy. Yeah, Pascal alluded already to coal, for example. And the fourth point is we look at our products. Yeah, we look for ways to adapt our products in a way that they contribute to the transformation. That is the building back better principle. It's repairing damages instead of buying new thing. It's looking for sustainable, durable solution in claims management. So let's say it's the whole value chain. It's where we invest, it's what we insure, it's our products, and it's our own operations, where we are committed not only up to 2050 or 2045, but really to have first concrete, measurable steps until 2025.
Just to follow up on what you mean by having a portfolio which is 100% aligned to targets, does that mean that from the next few years onwards, we can see German insurers perhaps, de facto penalizing or charging premiums on types of activities which are not climate related? Like, what's the carrot stick incentive versus, I guess, regulatory push that's happening in the industry, which is making this concrete? Like, I mean, who should be worried by the fact that German insurers are embracing the climate transition?
I think nobody should be worried. Yeah, it's a win-win situation. It's not that we are not investing into non-green assets because we are a kind of charity. I mean, it's in our own interest to do this. And up to now, we have slightly more than 50%, exactly 56% of our assets under management, which are already managed according to sustainability criteria. There's a significant increase, but we see more. What we need, and Pascal already has used the term taxonomy, we need clear standards, what is green and what is just greenwashing. When we can come back to this later, we need to enlarge the range of activities to which the taxonomy is applied. It would be good to have a global standard because large insurance companies are not only active in Europe, so the common market is key. It's always better to have a common rules for 27 countries than for just one country. But of course, it's preferable for large companies that operate on a global scale to have global standards. So nobody should be worried, but it's a normal way if one wants to do sustainable business, as I said, we have decade-long business relationships, then it's in our own interest to invest the assets that we have into a sustainable way of looking forward.
Sure. Maybe this is the perfect way to actually jump into the taxonomy topic, because you mentioned it and it's still a live subject. So only a couple of weeks ago, we had the latest draft of the Delegated Act. Jörg, I'm interested to know, because there is a lot of talk that, that potentially this exercise, which is incredibly important, as you said, developing a classification system, could end up bamboozling markets, because I think as of now, we have a draft text which runs over 500 pages. There are fears that it could become the green version of Basel, creating arbitrage opportunities for people who are clever enough to understand how. And that rather than providing clarity to the market, we could end up in a situation where there's so many loopholes and annexes and accompanying text for different types of sectors that it won't bring the clarity to the market. Where do you stand at the German Insurers Association on what the draft looks like to you?
I mean, yes, there's always the fear that things get over bureaucratic, over complex. But in my view, the recent proposals by the European Commission definitely go in the right direction. What we need from our perspective is, as I said, is broadening the taxonomy, in particular to public activities. Because currently, as the taxonomy operates, it targets corporates, which only covers roughly 11% of our investments. And what would be important for the future, that economic activities are also covered that were done by states and by governments, and to include these activities quickly into the taxonomy. Because currently what we clearly see, especially when it comes to so-called green bonds, that we have higher demands than supply of green assets, especially green bonds. Here, of course, the European recovery package or Next Generation EU will very much help to have a greater supply of safe, liquid, and green assets. So the number that I have in mind, that the EU will roughly issue 30% of the overall recovery fund under green bonds. That is very much welcome. But as I said, currently, we also have green bonds issued by the German governments. They have clearly, let's say the profitability is lower than for so-called traditional bonds, simply because there is more supply, more demand than supply for this kind of green bonds. And that is an area where we need to catch up quickly, because there is clearly an investment appetite for this kind of green bond. So it would be welcome, first, if these activities also covered in the future by the taxonomy. And second, of course, in the context of global financial markets and investment horizons, it would be good if we could have a kind of international dissemination of the taxonomy in order to have a greater acceptance and success here.
Pascal, do you think, one, is the taxonomy going to survive the European Parliament? Obviously, we had some troubles at the beginning of the year where the Delegated Act didn't make it through, mainly for reasons on the Council, but where do you see the politics of the Parliament in terms of making sure that this Delegated Act comes to life? And maybe secondly, just also if you could respond to Jörg's point about the need for green bonds. You, of course, have been a very, very vocal advocate of the Recovery Fund incorporating this green bond standard. That standard, as it stands, will not be using the taxonomy because we're still delayed on the taxonomy. But is that just a kind of technical hiccup? And actually, hopefully when the stars align, as you say, we will end up having green bonds based on the taxonomy, and the sort of the Brussels effect will flourish.
Well, we could have a 1-hour debate on the taxonomy itself, and I'm not going to enter into all the details of that. You said that, well, it can, maybe it will not provide the clarity the market would need. But you know, when we are too simplistic, some say, well, it's too not flexible enough to blah, blah, blah. And when you go granular, then it's more complex, and it's too complex. So at the end of the day, there is always a good reason for doing nothing. And I must say that when you mentioned the fact that it is 400 pages, look at the accounting rules. You know how many pages the accounting rules? Okay, and it's used every day by the financial market and by the companies. So I don't think there is that much risk, because actually at the end of the day, once we would have agreed on everything, somebody will invest the software that will put all the data and just deliver a very nice interface, and then you will just have to click here and there, and then it will be done. And you know, one French company, Suez, presented, went public for the first time in spring with its account taxonomy compliant, anticipating the regulation. And they did it internally. It took them a couple of weeks, cost almost zero. So, I mean, it's practicable. It's practicable. So we just need to settle the two remaining hot issues regarding gas and nuclear. Once we would have done that, we would have something fit for purpose. And then, of course, we have to make sure that, as you said, there is a Brussels effect. So then the conversation with the US will be key. Maybe if I could also build on what Jörg said about the insurer. I don't know if you plan to ask me this question, but I have also a question related to the way the German insurers see the reform of Solvability II. Because we know it will be part or not but I hope it will be part of the June Sustainable Finance Package. One of the new frontier, I would say, would be to better capture the climate risk through CRD CRR for banks and through solvability regulation for insurers. And on that matter, well, when you look at the market of life insurance and the key players, you have a couple of countries, couple of markets that are key. Germany is one of them. France is another one. So that's very important that we start having this conversation, because the Commission is working on it. And the next very short-term deadline is the end of June to go public with a proposal on intention, not the legal proposal. The legal text will be a bit later, but the political intention, saying, okay, we are going to integrate the capture of the climate risk and the financing of the transition through solvability reform. So, of course, it's a very important piece, to my view, of the June Sustainable Finance Package, and we'd be happy to use this opportunity to have a better understanding of what is the view of of Jörg and the German companies on that one.
Yeah, sure. Jörg, do you want to go for it?
Yes, sure. It's true, going the planned review of Solvency II, which is what is Basel regulation for the banks. And indeed, there is a link to the Green Deal, to green investment. And let me focus on two things here. The first one, you know, of course, that the Commission will build on EIOPA's proposal. And the proposal as it currently stands has, in our view, some flaws. It relates very much to the topic of extrapolation, to put it in a technical term, because if one would take EIOPA's proposal to 100%, it would lead via this extrapolation method, which is a new one in Solvency II in the future, it would lead that we have to move from, let's say, investment into real assets, including equity, long-term equity investment, private equity, but also infrastructure investments, which could be electricity networks or things like that, that we move away from real assets and bonds, just because we would need more regulatory capital for investing in real assets. So this is a kind of flaw and kind of unbalanced approach, which we hope the Commission, let's say, will repair in its proposal, because there's a contradiction between what EIOPA has drafted on one side and what are the goals of the Commission in a broader sense, meaning for the Green Deal, or label it even the Green Capital Union. So, yeah, the balance is not right there in our view currently. The second point is where we might more disagree, Pascal and ourselves, is indeed the risk-based approach to insurers regulation, in this case, Solvency II. I mean, a risk-based approach, both for the investment side and the underwriting side, is needed to maintain policyholder protection and financial stability for both. And there are examples of green supporting or brown penalizing factors in Solvency II. And in our view, Solvency II is and should remain a holistic risk assessment and quantification system to reduce the risks of insurance insolvency. And any politically motivated preference for green investments, so the green supporting factor, or a disadvantage for brown investments, so the brown penalizing factor, do not fit with this kind of risk-oriented approach. And so we want to keep this holistic risk assessment of Solvency II, because even if there's a political will for more green investment, which we share, one cannot say that any kind of green investment is by nature risk-free. I mean, if one takes the example very concretely and talking about the country that I know best, if one would have invested 5 or 10 years ago into the German solar industry, it would be a complete loss. Yeah, so one has to be careful here to strike the right balance between more than one political goal. Yeah, one is customer protection, which is undisputed in the insurance industry, or more precise, policyholder protection. Second one is financial stability, of course, what is key. And then, of course, the double transformation of our economy. So there are there's more than one goal, and we have to really make Solvency II fit for this overall, for this number of goals. Pascal, I hope this answers at least a bit your question when it comes to Solvency II review.
Pascal, do you have any initial response? I mean, just from hearing Jörg, it sounds like the Commission's got quite a job in its hands, but as you said, it has some time at least before presenting us a legal text on Solvency II.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the June timeline is to signal an intention. The legal drafting is a bit later on. I'm completely in line with what you said about the fact that you cannot make a sort of automatic connection between a green asset being less risky, and that's why the green supporting factor, as presented by some, is probably a no-go. There is another way to think about it, which is the level of risk of fossil-based assets. So not a reward for green assets, but something that would better capture the risk of having stranded assets in your portfolio. And coal is a good example, maybe tomorrow other technologies. And that's precisely for the discussion. And I don't have, at that stage, I don't have a strong view on how to do it. But I think when I discuss with companies, insurance companies, that are very, I would say, active and front-running the discussion of how to redesign their businesses in light of climate neutrality. Usually, you come to the point when one specific company, if whatever the size is, and we have in Europe and in Germany and in France one of the largest. At the end of the day, they say, well, okay, but if I quit this business for real, somebody will take it. So then it's good at the company level, but the theory change at the macro level, actually, we are not there yet. So that's why we need really to design it right. And again, I say it again, you're right in your critique of one proposal. I share this critique, but maybe there are technical other proposals that could lead us with a better capturing of the risk of stranded assets in your portfolio without leaving the front-running companies alone, I would say, competing with other actors that wouldn't take that on board. And at the end of the day, we wouldn't then send the right signals to the market. I'm not, again, it's just to open the discussion, but I think it's important that we consider it's a conversation important to have in the coming weeks and months so that we can start paving the way for the reform.
Definitely, thank you. We have about 10 minutes left and I'd like to ask a question. You can use the hashtag GDV Live on Twitter and hopefully the question can get translated to me. Jörg, I'm going to do something now which I think which has become a stereotypical activity of everyone in Brussels when they meet a German person, but that's to ask them how the federal elections are going to affect the political debate in the European Union, particularly given the surge of the Greens. This is sort of, it's the theme that we're all watching, which is supposed to come to a head in the next couple of months as we get closer to the election. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how you think the debate in Germany may shift given the prominence and the popularity of the Greens, how you assessed the new Green Party leader in terms of her positioning on big issues of the climate transition. And as somebody who's working on the side of or representing the private sector, what's your relationship with the New Greens, and how do you plan on building it, given that they will at the very least be a kingmaker in this coalition and potentially be the party leading it?
Okay, then happy to answer the question, Maureen. I will, at a different occasion, continue with Pascal on discussing how we invest or not invest, how we insure or not insure, let's say, coal projects, oil or other fossil activities. So what's the line between divestment and engagement, which is more the later debate. You are aware that, for example, any kind of operations of coal are legal in Germany until 2038. So as rightly you said, yeah, if they are legal, they need to be insured. If I don't do this, what is if someone else does? So let's come back to this. It's a very lively debate on. It's most lively currently on coal, but let's say the Rhine is a dividing line when it comes to assess nuclear activity. So let's do it on a different occasion, but that's key. I mean, of course, we are, as German Insurance Industry Association, neutral when it comes to the elections, and we are welcoming any government consisting of parties which are what we call democratic parties, based on the values of our constitution. What one could clearly see here is the number one topic, if one looks at short-term polls, longer-term polls, now is climate change and climate policy. Yeah, that goes across the whole society. It's not the pandemic and how you deal with it. It's not what it was, let's say, in the last 20 years, unemployment, healthcare, pensions, whatever you have, it's now clearly climate change. And this will not go away. Yeah, there's a substantial shift in the center of our society. And that will affect all political parties. And let's say, at least the whole center of German politics has become green. And then you have those who have become this earlier and those who've come this later. But it's the key political agenda, how we deal with transforming our economy, which is a very much manufactured-based economy in Germany, as you know. Yeah, I mean, Pascal alluded to the German car industry. 1 out of 7 jobs in Germany depend directly or indirectly on the car industry. And what does it mean for the years to come? The question is, we will have more extreme weather. We already see this. And there is an effect on insurance companies. Yeah, you have more floodings at the same time. You have more drought periods. So the kind of plants which you can cultivate in your garden, or if you do this as a professional farmer, that change. Yeah, you have some grapes in wine growing which were home in Germany for centuries. Those it's now too hot, so we shift to different type of grapes, whatever. So it's at the very center of the current debate in Germany is climate change and how we react to this. It will be a key debate in the 5 remaining months here in the German electoral campaign. It's an interesting one, yes, because Chancellor Merkel will not run again after 16 years of being in office. So it's an open race. What you rightly said, given our political system, it's very likely to have a coalition government. And indeed, if you run the possible coalition, simply running the numbers according to the polls, the highest likelihood that a party is a member of the ruling coalition is currently with the Greens. It's not to say that they nominate the chancellor, but being part of the coalition-based government, for them, it's the highest chance. So let's say the German business in society is not surprised by this. It's a trend that was foreseeable for at least a number of years. Let's say the Greens are currently, we have a federal system, as you know. They participate in 11 out of the 16 regional governments. Yeah, they have the prime minister in the land of Baden-Württemberg. This is the home of the German cars, coming back to this. So it's not a completely surprise. So we as insurance industry, as well as many other industry sectors, we work with the Greens as we most work with other democratic parties. One can be assured that any new German government will be committed towards Europe. This will not change by a possible Green participation in the next government. I mean, that's my personal view, but many observers will agree. The Greens are probably the most pro-European party that we have in our political system currently. So that should be helpful to our European friends and partners. And I've worked for a company that has its European headquarters in Paris before I joined the GDV here, and I had explained many times, Pascal, excuse me now, that the German Greens are very different to the French Greens. So nobody should fear a possible participation in the government for, let's say, a country that has a very strong manufacturing base.
Pascal, maybe just to get your sense of France, will the French president secretly be cheering on the Greens in October? And perhaps maybe you could give us a sense of whether or not this could be a game changer for the politics of the EU, given that on previous Green files, in the early, I guess, in the last term of Chancellor Merkel, but the German government has had to take slightly nuanced, sometimes hostile positions on Green files because of the sensitivities of its own industry. If we end up having a Green Chancellor, does that completely change the political calculation of, majority voting in the EU, given how much weight Germany has?
So maybe starting with what Jörg said at the end, I do agree that the German Greens are definitely not of the same nature, I would say, than the French ones. And the key issue now is who is going to transform green concerns from a counterpower to a ruling party. That could be done in different ways. That could be done through a Green Party, that could be done through a coalition, that could be done through an alternative party. That depends. Depends on the electoral system, depends if you have proportional or not, it depends. But the key issue, one key issue of political lives, in Europe at least, is which party, which leader is going to seize this opportunity to transform the green concerns from, I would say, radical counterpower background to something which is mainstream and able to transform the whole society, the manufacturing tissue, I would say, of companies and so on and so on. That's a key element of the political life, not only Germany. And now, from a French perspective, we consider, if I take my Macron's team hat, we consider that a coalition between CDU and the Green, or Green and CDU, will bring Berlin closer to Paris on many topics. Not on all, but on many. And one of these, where it's obvious, it's the European vision of budget policies, on investment policies, energy policy, and so on, and climate policy, the Green Deal, and so on and so on and so on. So I think we can have stars aligning that would be very helpful to converge even more than today and make the most of the French rotating presidency of the EU. I mean, we made probably the most of the German rotating presidency of the EU with the recovery plan. And Merkel took her risk, thanks to her, and we managed to have this historic deal on the recovery plan. And if there is a green-black or black-green coalition in Germany, in Berlin, when France will be heading the presidency of the EU, that could speed up as well some important reforms. That's option A. And I must say that we are already working on this option to prepare the French rotating presidency, and I'm the one mandated to do so with the Green part, the German parties, democratic parties. I insist on this, democratic parties, including the Greens, but not only the Greens for sure. But I must say, and I cannot be more cautious than that. I must say that in France, you have a real Trump risk. When you look at the polls today, Marine Le Pen is at 48%. 48% second term, second ballot. So up to now, it was very clear that the extreme right was rising, but was unable to take power. I wouldn't be so affirmative today, unfortunately. So that's why we are working hard on plan A. But you know, I can't tell you that for sure Le Pen will not take power in France next year.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Of course, we need as well. It's purely politics, but it's something that is a matter of interest for you as well, I guess, because you cannot build Europe, and you can have a smooth scenario in Berlin and in Paris if you have, of course, extreme right in power in France.
Definitely. I think I still remember 2017 where Martin Schulz was the man who was going to bring Berlin closer to Paris, but then we ended up having a little surprise and he wasn't there in the end, and that, at least in the short run, meant that there were still some tensions in that relationship. But I'm afraid we don't have time to get into the actual, peculiarities of what might happen in France, given the time constraints. However, I think we've had a brilliant conversation. So my last job is to say thank you very much, Pascal. Thank you so much, Jörg. This is going to be a very lively debate, and hopefully, I'm sure we will be on forums like this talking about similar issues, which I think even in the next couple of months, the nature of the debate will transform into really thinking about the concrete things that are coming out of Brussels. So thank you both for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the latest GDV live session. And I just take a moment to say thank you both to my guests, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marine. Bye-bye. Pascal, au revoir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.